From the moment Sergeant James Doakes locked eyes with Dexter Morgan, something felt off. While everyone else at Miami Metro was charmed by Dexter's polite demeanor and an endless supply of donuts, Doakes saw through the act. His sharp instincts, honed by years in special forces, picked up on the subtle cracks in Dexter's carefully crafted facade, the fake smiles, the suspicious disappearances, and that unsettling fascination with murder scenes. It wasn't just a gut feeling. It was something deeper, an unshakable sense that danger was hiding behind Dexter's charm. The real question is, how did Doakes uncover the truth about a man who had fooled everyone else? From the very beginning, something about Dexter Morgan just didn't sit right with Sergeant James Doakes. You could say it was instinct, or maybe it was his highly trained ability to spot danger. But whatever it was, Doakes picked up on Dexter's strange vibes almost immediately. Unlike everyone else at Miami Metro, who was more than happy to overlook Dexter's quirks, Doakes seemed to zero in on him with laser focus.
Just what I always thought.
The first time Doakes voiced his unease, it became an iconic moment for fans of the show. Looking at Dexter with a mix of suspicion and disgust, he bluntly declared, "You give me the creeps, you know that, Dexter." It wasn't just a throwaway line. It perfectly captured the tension between these two characters and set the tone for their relationship. While others saw Dexter as a reliable colleague and all-around nice guy, Doakes wasn't buying the act for a second. It wasn't just Dexter's demeanor that raised red flags. His behavior at work was unusual, to say the least. As a blood spatter analyst, Dexter was surrounded by some of the most gruesome crime scenes in Miami, and he often seemed a little too comfortable with the chaos. In the very first episode, Dexter is found spinning in his chair, surrounded by photos of blood patterns, with a gleeful look on his face. For most people, this would be unnerving enough, but for Doakes, it was confirmation that something about Dexter was off. And it wasn't just the spinning. Dexter's fascination with blood and his overly detailed breakdowns of murder scenes were enough to make even the most hardened cops uneasy. One particular moment stood out early on. At a crime scene, Dexter began analyzing a gruesome murder with an almost eerie enthusiasm. While everyone else was focused on solving the case, Dexter seemed to be enjoying himself. Doakes, watching this play out, couldn't help but call him out. His sharp instincts picked up on something others missed. Dexter wasn't just good at understanding killers, he seemed to think like one. It was a small but significant moment that cemented Doakes' belief that there was more to Dexter than met the eye. Much of Doakes' ability to sniff out Dexter's secret came from his background as a Special Forces operative. Before joining Miami Metro, Doakes had spent years in high-stakes, life-or-death situations. He was trained to read people, spot threats, and trust his instincts. That training carried over into his police work, making him one of the department's most perceptive officers. Where others might have dismissed Dexter's behavior as quirky or eccentric, Doakes saw a carefully constructed mask. Dexter's fake smiles and generous offerings of donuts didn't fool him for a second. To Doakes, it was all an act, a thin veneer covering something dark and dangerous. What made Doakes so effective was his refusal to back down. He wasn't the type to let gut feelings slide. If something felt off, he dug deeper, asking the tough questions others wouldn't. This relentless pursuit of the truth made him a great cop, but also put him on a collision course with Dexter. As the series progressed, it became clear that Doakes wasn't just suspicious.
You're connected to this. I don't know how, but I'm gonna find out, and some of what I find is gonna stick to your ass.
He was determined to prove that his instincts were right. And for Dexter, who had spent years perfecting his double life, this was the beginning of a dangerous game of cat and mouse. Living a double life isn't easy, but Dexter Morgan made it look almost effortless most of the time. By day, he was a blood spatter analyst for the Miami Metro Police Department, a calm and meticulous professional whose job was to piece together the story behind the blood. By night, he transformed into something entirely different, a cold and calculated vigilante serial killer. Balancing these two worlds required an extraordinary level of planning, but even Dexter wasn't perfect, and cracks in his carefully constructed life started to show. Dexter had to get creative to maintain his cover during the day. While most of his colleagues were clocking hours in the office or at crime scenes, Dexter often found excuses to slip away. He would claim to be running tests, collecting evidence, or following up on cases, all to buy himself the time he needed to stalk and eliminate his targets. Most of the time, his coworkers didn't notice, or at least didn't care. But Sergeant Doakes wasn't like most people. He paid attention, and every time Dexter disappeared, it only fueled his suspicions. One example of Dexter sneaking off comes early in Season 1, during the episode Love American Style. Dexter becomes fixated on George Castillo, a human trafficker whose method of dealing with unpaid immigrants was as horrifying as it was ruthless. He would simply toss them overboard. Dexter knew Castillo was the kind of monster who wouldn't stop unless someone stopped him, so he made it his mission to take him out. On the day he planned to kill Castillo, Dexter tried to slip out of the office unnoticed. Deb, his foster sister and a detective in the department, caught him and asked where he was going. Dexter casually replied, "Crime scene," and made his exit. At the time, Doakes wasn't paying attention, which allowed Dexter to carry out his dark deed without interference. But as the season progressed, Doakes became more vigilant, making such escapes far more challenging. Deb's role in Dexter's life often provided him with an unexpected layer of protection. As his sister, she trusted him implicitly, even when his behavior seemed odd. She was quick to cover for him, whether intentionally or unknowingly, which sometimes helped Dexter dodge Doakes' scrutiny. One of the most critical moments in their dynamic came in Season 1, Episode 12, when Deb was kidnapped by the ice truck killer. As the department scrambled to find her, Dexter became unreachable, raising eyebrows. Doakes and Lieutenant Laguerta went to Dexter's house to deliver the news about Deb's disappearance, but he wasn't there. Doakes was immediately suspicious. Later, when Doakes followed Dexter to the shipping yard where the ice truck killer had taken Deb,
Are you following me now?
You better have a hell of a reason for being here.
I'm looking for my sister.
In a cargo box?
it was a high-stakes moment that highlighted just how close Doakes was to uncovering the truth. For Dexter, every disappearance was a calculated risk. He knew he couldn't avoid suspicion forever, especially with someone as sharp as Doakes watching his every move. While most of his coworkers dismissed his absences as part of his job or personal quirks, Doakes wasn't so easily fooled. He saw a pattern forming. Dexter was always missing at the most inconvenient times, especially when something critical was happening. Whether it was a case involving the ice truck killer or the sudden need to run tests, Dexter's excuses never sat right with Doakes. If you don't want Sergeant Doakes to find out your secrets, it's best that you subscribe to our channel. Dexter Morgan's fascination with crime scenes wasn't just professional curiosity, it bordered on unsettling. While most people working in law enforcement might feel a sense of duty or even unease when confronted with gruesome murders, Dexter seemed to thrive in the blood-soaked chaos. His enthusiasm for the macabre was a signature trait that often raised eyebrows, especially for someone as perceptive as Sergeant James Doakes. One moment that perfectly captures this is in Season 1, Episode 7. The team is investigating a particularly brutal murder where a student's artery has been slashed open. While analyzing the blood patterns near the body, Dexter's focus is intense, almost like he's admiring a masterpiece. For a moment, it's easy to forget he's supposed to be horrified. Doakes, who's been keeping an eye on him, watches his colleague a little too closely. Unable to hold back, he blurts out, "You getting a goddamn hard on there, Morgan?" It's a sharp, confrontational question that cuts right through the tension, exposing how strange Dexter's behavior looks to someone paying attention. Dexter brushes off the comment with a quick denial, but the damage is done. Doakes doesn't see someone horrified by the crime, or even just doing their job. He sees someone who seems to enjoy what they're seeing. It's moments like these that deepen Doakes' suspicion. There's something about Dexter's reactions that's just wrong. It isn't just his fascination with the blood or the crime. It's the way he loses himself in the details, as if he's recognizing a part of himself in the killer's work. Doakes' ability to sense something off about Dexter goes beyond simple observation. His instincts come from his own dark past. Before joining Miami Metro, Doakes served as a Special Forces operative, a role that placed him in violent, high-stakes situations. Those experiences shaped him into a man who could spot danger from a mile away. More importantly, they likely awakened a darker side of his own. While the show doesn't explicitly dive into the details, it's clear Doakes has been shaped by violence, both witnessing it and being a part of it. That background gave him a unique ability to pick up on Dexter's true nature. There's a theory among fans that this is a case of darkness recognizing darkness. Doakes' violent past and finely tuned instincts made him sensitive to the hidden menace lurking within Dexter. While most people at Miami Metro saw Dexter as a quirky but brilliant analyst, Doakes saw the cracks in his facade. The fake smiles, the forced charm, the obsessive attention to detail at crime scenes. It all painted a picture that only Doakes seemed to understand. Dexter's connection to the ice truck killer case only fueled Doakes' suspicions. While the rest of the team struggled to piece together clues, Dexter often seemed to know more than he should. It wasn't just his professional expertise that made him valuable, it was his personal connection to the case, though no one else realized it at the time. One of the most glaring examples comes in Season 1, Episode 12, when the ice truck killer kidnaps Deb, and Dexter becomes mysteriously unreachable. Doakes and Lagerta go to Dexter's house, only to find that he's conveniently out. Later, Doakes follows Dexter to the shipping yard, where the final confrontation with the ice truck killer takes place. When confronted, Dexter delivers one of the weakest excuses imaginable. He was waiting for furniture from Thailand to be delivered. The absurdity of the explanation isn't lost on Doakes. He doesn't believe a word of it, but he doesn't have enough evidence to call Dexter out. Still, his suspicions only grow from that point on. James Doakes' relentless pursuit of Dexter Morgan was both his greatest strength and his ultimate undoing. From the moment Doakes began suspecting Dexter, he became consumed with uncovering the truth. But while his instincts were spot on, his methods painted him as erratic and dangerous. Dexter, ever the master manipulator, knew how to exploit this, leading to one of the most gripping arcs in the series. When Dexter's double life started to unravel under Doakes' scrutiny, he made a desperate move to throw him off the trail. He fabricated a story about being a drug addict. It was an easy lie to sell. His frequent absences and erratic behavior could easily be chalked up to substance abuse. In Season 2, Episode 3, Dexter even went so far as to join a Narcotics Anonymous program to solidify his cover. This allowed him to continue his secret life while also deflecting questions from those around him. But Doakes wasn't buying it. He confronted Dexter at work, making it clear that he didn't believe the drug addict story for a second. Later, Doakes took it a step further by crashing Dexter's NA meeting. It was a bold move, even for Doakes, and it showed just how deeply he was invested in exposing Dexter. Seeing Dexter surrounded by recovering addicts only fueled Doakes' suspicions. For him, this wasn't the behavior of a man battling addiction. It was a poorly constructed alibi. After speaking with Dexter's sister, Deborah, Doakes realized she had no idea about her brother's supposed addiction. This inconsistency only deepened his resolve to uncover what Dexter was really hiding. As Doakes grew more determined, Dexter realized he needed to take drastic action. Framing Doakes became his next strategy, and he executed it with chilling precision. In Season 2, Episode 7, Dexter gave Doakes false information about a crime scene, leading him to interrogate the wrong suspect. When Doakes' mistake came to light, it painted him as reckless and unprofessional. But Dexter didn't stop there. He provoked Doakes into a physical altercation at work, headbutting him in front of their colleagues. Doakes, unable to contain his frustration, retaliated, making him look unstable in the eyes of the department. This was all part of Dexter's plan to get Doakes suspended, effectively removing him as a threat. The suspension was a turning point for Doakes. Stripped of his badge and isolated from the department, he had nothing to lose. This newfound freedom gave him more time to focus on Dexter, but it also left him vulnerable. The moment that sealed Doakes' fate came when he broke into Dexter's apartment and discovered the box of blood slides. Each slide represented one of Dexter's victims, a meticulous record of his kills. For Doakes, this was the smoking gun he had been searching for. It was undeniable proof that Dexter wasn't just a creep, he was a killer. In any other situation, this discovery would have been enough to end Dexter's reign of terror, but Dexter, as always, was one step ahead. When Doakes fled with the box of slides, intending to turn them over to the authorities, Dexter used the opportunity to frame him for the murders. By planting evidence and manipulating the narrative, Dexter turned the tables, making it appear as though Doakes was the Bay Harbor butcher. Doakes' downfall wasn't just the result of Dexter's cunning, it was also a consequence of his own unrelenting nature. His refusal to back down, even when everyone else dismissed his suspicions, made him a target. Dexter saw this and used it to his advantage, systematically dismantling Doakes' credibility. What makes this all the more tragic is that Doakes was right all along. He was the only one who truly saw Dexter for what he was, but his efforts to expose the truth ultimately led to his demise. The bloodslide box was the moment when Doakes was closest to victory, but it also marked the beginning of the end. Dexter's ability to twist the situation and turn the evidence against Doakes showcased his ruthless brilliance. For Doakes, the discovery of the slides should have been his triumph. Instead, it became the catalyst for his destruction. Dexter Morgan had mastered the art of blending in, appearing harmless and even likable to almost everyone around him. His carefully crafted charm, polite demeanor, and constant offerings of donuts made him seem approachable. Most of his colleagues at Miami Metro accepted him as a quirky but brilliant blood spatter analyst. But Sergeant James Doakes wasn't like most people. He was the only one who saw through Dexter's act, recognizing that something darker lurked beneath the surface. Others didn't suspect Dexter because they were too distracted by their own lives and preoccupations, allowing his carefully crafted facade to go unquestioned. Each member of the Miami Metro homicide team was deeply consumed by their own personal struggles, quirks, and ambitions, which made Dexter's peculiar behavior blend into the background. Deborah Morgan, Dexter's foster sister, was fiercely loyal to him, and her unrelenting need for validation often blinded her to the red flags. She desperately sought approval, both from her superiors and from Dexter, whom she idolized as her stable, reliable sibling. Her emotional turbulence and deep-seated insecurities made her a perfect shield for Dexter's dark secret, as she was too preoccupied with her own struggles to see through his mask. Vince Masuka, the department's eccentric forensics expert, frequently drew attention away from Dexter with his outrageous and often inappropriate sense of humor. Masuka's crude jokes and flamboyant personality became the center of attention in many interactions, making Dexter's more subtle quirks seem trivial in comparison. Where Dexter's unnerving remarks might have raised eyebrows, Masuka's comedic distractions made it easy for others to overlook them. It was as if Dexter's unsettling tendencies were buried under the noise of Masuka's over-the-top antics. Yet, not everyone was fooled. One person who consistently saw through Dexter's carefully constructed persona was Sergeant James Doakes. Unlike his colleagues, Doakes possessed razor-sharp instincts and an unshakable sense of intuition, honed by years of service as a Special Forces operative. His experiences in the field, often fraught with danger and betrayal, had conditioned him to detect even the subtlest signs of deceit. While others accepted Dexter's polite smiles and superficial small talk, Doakes found them hollow and calculated. Something about Dexter's presence set off alarm bells in his mind, a predator instinct recognizing another. In the novels, this dynamic was explored even further. Doakes' mistrust of Dexter was linked to his own dark passenger, a metaphor for his violent tendencies and inner demons. This shared darkness created an unspoken connection between the two men, as if Doakes' own turbulent past allowed him to sense the sinister truth lurking beneath Dexter's charming exterior. Darkness, it seemed, had a way of recognizing its own, and this bond of mutual understanding, however unspoken, drove Doakes' relentless suspicion. While others in the department remained blissfully unaware, distracted by their personal dramas and the constant stream of cases, Doakes was unwilling to ignore the peculiarities he saw in Dexter. His relentless pursuit of the truth about Dexter put him on a collision course with the very monster he suspected, creating a tension that would ultimately define their fateful relationship. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.